Hello everybody, in this video I'm going to share with you my 5 go-to tools for hand cut joinery and how they may benefit you. Let's get going. Now it's worth saying there's links in the description to any of these tools if you like the look of them, but the first one we're going to look at is the new Concepts fret saw. Now this thing, while it looks incredibly fancy over your standard coping saw, there's a reason for this truss-like structure here. The reason for it is that it allows more tension to be applied to this blade here, thus giving you less blade breakages, straighter cuts, and just all-round better handling. You can literally tension this thing to sound like a guitar. So this thing takes unpinned blades, which means that they can get them incredibly thin without having to worry about fitting a pin section on there, which is what you'd see on a standard coping saw. Now the throat on these comes in 3 sizes, which is a 3-inch, a 5-inch, which I have here, and an 8-inch as well. I went for the middle one, which is the 5-inch, and I haven't found a need to go any bigger or any smaller for it. You also have a few different options in terms of the blade clamping here. You can have one that has a lever tension on it, so you don't have to worry about twisting this bit here to tension the blade, and you also have one that allows you to swivel the blade from side to side, which means that if you're dovetailing a wider component, as you tilt the saw down, that isn't going to hit the top of the component and prevent you from getting it fully horizontal like that. Instead, what you can do is get it up like this, angle the blade to that little extra degree, and cut across like this. But the question is, do you actually need that swivel on there whatsoever anyway? And the answer to that is no, not really. If you're willing to write off one of your blades, which cost next to nothing anyway, what you can do is get a pair of pliers on it and simply bend the blade like that to the angle that you want. Just twist it a little bit at a time from either side, and voila, that blade is now twisted and I can cut horizontally like that. So now I'm no longer limited by the depth of this frame. I can simply go in at whatever point I want. And look at that, I'm cutting horizontally. So you'll see this saw endorsed by all sorts of people online, including myself, and there's good reason for that, because it is just so nice to use. It's incredibly lightweight, and it does exactly what a fret saw / coping saw should do. I would recommend you go for the 5-inch one. Don't worry about any of the lever tension or the swivel or anything like that, because that lever tension literally saves you about 5 seconds, and the swivel, as I've just showed you, you can do it with pliers. A really great buy. It is absolutely amazing for dovetailing. Now my second recommendation would be the Swann Morton SM01 blades. Now these are scalpel blades, but they are slightly different to the surgical ones you may have seen before. The reason for this is because they're a little bit thicker, so they don't bend as much. They're not as flimsy, which means they stay nice and rigid when you're going between dovetails, for example, where you can't entirely see what you're doing, but you need it to be as accurate as possible. They also have this chisel shape to them as well, so it means the cutting tip is very well supported from above. Again, makes it a little bit more rigid and less likely to break off. Now if you're feeling stingy, ooh, there's a dead fly on my waterstone. Lovely. Get him off. Sorry mate, feed that to whatever's out there. Now as I was saying, if you're feeling stingy, you can actually resharpen these blades because of the chisel shape. Just takes a few drags on the back like that. I'd recommend doing it on the side of your waterstone if you're using one of these, because it's less likely to put tracks and things in it, and similarly if you're doing it on a diamond stone, do it right on the edge. But a few strokes back like that will get you a nice new cutting edge on there. However, we all know how sharp scalpel blades are. They're very sharp. You're never really going to get it back to its original condition if you're doing it on a waterstone like that. So what you can do is just buy these in packs of 10 or 100 and you're pretty much sorted for life. As soon as one of these gets blunt, or I scrape out a bit of glue with it or whatever, I take it off, dispose of it in the correct manner, and fit a new one on, and I've pretty much got a brand new marking knife for literally a couple of pennies. Would I go back to using one of those chunky V-pointed marking knives? Absolutely not. This thing does it all. Now just be wary with these blades because the shank on them is quite wide, so they may not fit into your standard scalpel blade holders. So the link in the description will take you to a page where you can buy both the blade and the handle, with the whole setup looking quite similar to Rob Cosman's marking knife. So if he likes it, then it must be pretty good, or you can make your own handle like I've done here. My third pick is the Gyokucho Dozuki Saw. Now this is a Japanese saw, so it cuts on the pull stroke. If you want to know a little bit more about these, then have a look at my video, What Saws Do You Need? The link is up here, and that'll describe the difference between a Japanese saw and a standard Western saw, which you may have seen. But this one, oh man, does it cut like absolute butter. Again, I think this is the one that David Barron uses. So to remove the blade, you simply unscrew this, slide it forward, and then it comes out like that. Look how thin this blade is. This is the advantage with Japanese saws. Because they cut on the pull stroke, they pull themselves into tension. Whereas if you were to make the saw plate on a standard push saw this thin, as it cuts, it's just going to buckle all over the place. The Japanese have really got it right with this one. And from what I've heard in terms of reviews and everything like that, Gyokucho is most certainly the way to go with it. Just to give you a demonstration of how quickly and accurately you can use this saw to cut out dovetails, for example. Here we go. No editing whatsoever. Actually, we'll use the new concept saw to get rid of that middle bit. Why not? So that thin blade fits straight down the Japanese saw cut. Take the edges off. And voila, lovely, accurate dovetail joints ready to be chiseled down. Now this next one's a little bit of an unconventional one because a lot of you may think that I only use fancy tools. Not in all cases, because number 4 is this set of 4 Faithfull engineer square. Now Faithfull is kind of a budget brand and a lot of their tools are just absolutely terrible. But this set of 4 engineer squares is absolutely spot on. I got them for a birthday present about 4 years ago. They all come in this lovely wooden box. They're all accurate and these are all the sizes I need for pretty much all of my joinery. This is great for dovetails. These two are great when I'm doing things like lap joints and things that require a little bit more distance to be stretched. And this one is great for setting up machines to make sure fences are square, blades are square and everything like that. It really doesn't cost a lot, and to get a set of 4 that covers all grounds, it's an absolute no-brainer. I'm really happy with these. So the question is, why should you go for an engineer square over something like a wooden tri-square? Because I still see a lot of woodworkers using wooden tri-squares because they think it's made of wood, that must be for woodwork. These are called engineer squares, they must be for engineers. If they're made for engineers, that means they've got to be spot on, which means they need to be square on this face here and also this external face here. This is the catch. With wooden tri-squares, they're only guaranteed to be square on this inside face here, because generally you have a metal plate here and then a metal blade. There's going to be no movement between those whatsoever. However, the outside face, you've got bare wood exposed on there in most cases, and if that wood moves slightly out of parallel, that is no longer square to this top edge here. So if you're measuring if something's internally square, it's not going to be accurate. Go for something more accurate like this. This Faithfull set is a really good buy. So next we're on to tool number 5, which is something that you would have seen me use extensively, which is the Veritas wheel marking gauge. This thing is incredibly nice to use, gives a really crisp line, and is a lot more versatile than your standard wooden marking gauges. The reason this is more versatile is because with a wooden marking gauge, you have to get a marking gauge with a pin in it if you want to cut with the grain, but then you need to get a separate marking gauge with a knife in it if you want to cut across the grain like this. So you'd need to get a cutting gauge if you wanted to do dovetails, for example, cutting across like this, whereas if you needed to thickness a component down to a certain size, so you were just setting it nearly to that top edge, for this you would need to get a pin. So you need 2 separate marking gauges and they're quite clunky as it is. Why not have it all in one little thing like this, which is easier to use, more accurate and more versatile. So how does this work? Well, you've got a cutter which is recessed into the head here. So if this was to roll off your bench or something like that, you're not going to ding that cutter as long as you have it recessed into the top like that. And on this shank here, you've got 2 locking nuts on there. One is like this collet one. So you slide this up and down, lock that down in place. And then if you leave this top one loose, you can actually rotate that head, and what it's doing is micro adjusting it up and down on a screw thread which is down here. So you can get this set up to very accurate measurements, and then once you're done, lock it down like that and you've got your setting. Now I've had this marking gauge for about 4 years now. You've seen how much work I've done with it. Let me show you how well the cutter is still doing. Absolutely no need to replace it whatsoever, because what I can do, if I started to get a tiny ding or a little bit of dullness on this top blade here, I can simply undo the screw on the top, rotate it a little bit, lock it back down, and then I know that if I pick this up with this nut facing upwards I've got a fresh cutting edge on there. Now my marking gauge here has graduations up the side in metric, so it's very handy if I'm working to a working drawing or something, for example, but it's really not necessary, to be honest. You can just use a ruler measured against the stock here and it'll still be very accurate, but to be honest, the graduations cost like £1 or £2 extra. So for me, it was a bit of a no-brainer. And there we go, guys. There is my 5 favourite tools for hand-cut joinery. You would have seen me use these extensively in my hand-cut joint series. So anyway, links to where you can buy all of these tools are in the description. And also, if you look a little bit below that, there's a link to my page on kit.com where you can see the rest of all of the other tools that I own. They're all categorized into hand planes, chisels and knives, machinery, power tools. Very easy to navigate, and if you find one that you want to buy, just click on the image and it will take you directly to a seller's page. So I hope that answered some questions for you. You found it useful. Chuck any further questions in the comments below, and see you in the next video.